open as we speak for the pivotal Wisconsin primary. This state could determine how the Republican race plays out and whether Donald Trump can knock out Cruz and Kasich before the convention. Then we are live in Brooklyn at the Hillary Clinton campaign event. She trying to attract more women voters as she struggles to put away the pesky Bernie Sanders. Also, opt-out is back in. Thousands of parents today keeping their kids from taking standardized tests because, well, they don't like them. Is that sending the wrong message to the students? Good evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Well, as I said, polls in Wisconsin open for about another 3 hours, and the stakes couldn't be higher for Donald Trump and the guys chasing him. If Trump loses, it's looking more and more likely that he will not get the magic number of delegates necessary to wrap things up before the convention in Cleveland. Let's bring in our senior political correspondent, Andrew Whitman, with a look at both the math and how important this pivotal state is.
And Rich, it's important to keep in mind that it's not really about any one state at this point in the process, but rather how the results of that state in terms of delegates impacts what a candidate needs to do in all the states that come later on. Let's start with the delegate count at this moment. Donald Trump has 737 delegates, Ted Cruz has 475, and Kasich has 143. You need 1,237 delegates to win the nomination, but Trump's 737 delegates leaves him exactly 500 delegates short of what he needs, with only 930 delegates remaining in outstanding states. That means Trump would need to win 46% of all the remaining delegates and average about 40 or 41% of the vote to get there. The problem is right now it doesn't appear that Trump is anywhere near 40 or 41% of the vote in Wisconsin. In fact, he's sitting at 34% in poll averages, and worse still, the polls say he's not winning Wisconsin. He's running second to Ted Cruz. Now, looking at the candidate strengths in the remaining states, we get a pretty good idea of the specific numbers that Trump needs if he's going to get to 1,237 and win the nomination. And in Wisconsin, Trump needs to win around 28 to 30 delegates to get himself on track to get to that magic number of 1,237. And that's where Trump runs into serious trouble. The entire state awards 42 total delegates. 18 of those go to the statewide winner, which, if polls hold true, will not be Trump. So cross those 18 delegates off the list. The state also awards 3 delegates to the winner in each of its 8 congressional districts. So if we assume that Trump loses Wisconsin to Cruz tonight, he gets none of those delegates. And if the polling holds true and Trump wins 3 of Wisconsin's districts, and that may be estimating him on the high side, he'll get 9 delegates tonight. But remember, he needs to win between 28 and 30 delegates to get back on track to win the nomination, which means he's likely to leave the Badger State with around a 20-delegate deficit. And those are 20 delegates he'll need to make up in other states, meaning he'll need bigger wins in more states above what the polling suggests right now, making it that much harder for him to win the nomination before the convention, Rich.
Well, let's bring in our table, Andrew, to help us make sense of this. Scott Vanderhoff is former 5-term Republican county executive, and Ann Hayworth, former Republican congresswoman from New York. Thank you guys for joining us. As we mentioned, Dominic, we're going to be joining him later live in New York at a Hillary Clinton event. We'll get to the Democrats in a second, but on the Republican side, what's your sense, Nan, in terms of, from a math standpoint? Andrew broke down Wisconsin.
Very well.
Obviously, a lot of big states here. Exactly. The magic number of 1,237, does he get there before the end or no?
I'm going to predict he doesn't. I have a sense that there, of course, Mr. Trump has,
defied expectations.
Right,
before,
defied
yes.
expectation all the time. But I just think there's been enough cumulative damage that he's done to himself, if you will, self-inflicted damage, that I think it's going to be tough for him. And I think more and more people are thinking it'll be a contested convention. And of course, much of it does depend on the technicalities of every state going forward.
I'll get to that convention floor, but do you believe, Scott, in the trend that the congressman says? Is this the beginning of the end, or is it one bad night, he'll write himself in New York 2 weeks from now, and then the narrative gets rewritten all over again?
Well, I think he's going to tell us that. He's going to tell you this doesn't really much mean, aside from Andrew's, I think, good analysis, it doesn't mean much for him because he's going to win New York, he's got all those delegates, and he'll go on to talk about the Northeast where he picks up a number of delegates. Yep. But I think Nan's correct. I don't think he's going to get there if he loses tonight. I don't see how he gets the 30 or so that the delegates. And when you start to look at how this then plays out, even with the Pennsylvania delegates, for example, California delegates, it really becomes an enormous chess game. And I assume now that Trump's people are beginning to look at that chess game.
And I don't think New York is a slam dunk either, quite honestly, because certainly there are a lot of New York Republicans who are looking at Governor Kasich fairly heavily at this point. So I think that presents a challenge.
Let's get to Kasich for a second, and then we'll get to the floor fight math, because he's an integral element to this, which is the only thing seemingly that Trump and Kasich can agree on is, Trump and Cruz, is they want Kasich out. And for albeit very different reasons.
Right?
Trump wants him out because he thinks he's siphoning off those magic delegates to get to 1237. And Cruz seemingly wants him out because while he doesn't want anyone to get to 1237 because he doesn't believe he can get there either, he doesn't want this guy being a viable option potentially at the floor. Does Kasich stay into the end because he's got nothing to lose? Arguably, he wouldn't want to be in either one's cabinet. He's not going anywhere, is he?
No, I don't think so. I heard one pundit say he should have remained Ohio governor. He might have been even better situated for the convention to become president. But I don't see him dropping out. And of course, remember, any delegates he does have are gambling delegates as well, not just his own hopeful, intent to try to get the convention to back him. Same thing with Rubio. His delegates are sitting there, and this becomes awfully important, of course, in this chess game.
Well, to this chess game. And I'll go around the table. I'll start with you, Nan. Yeah. What do you think? Let's assume for this conversation, Trump doesn't get to 1237. Yeah. And let's say that the trending is somewhat similar to where we are. He is overwhelmingly, from a delegate count, far ahead of both Cruz and certainly Kasich. And Kasich doesn't get to the 8 states that you need by the rule right now. And nobody would take the bet that he's going to get 8 states right now. So he doesn't get 8 states. He's got some delegates. Theoretically, some of the other 17 that started off had some delegates too. They all convene in Cleveland, and Andrew's going to try and make sense of it. What do you think Andrew will see on the floor? Will it be an all-out melee where people will rewrite the rules, or do they stick to the rules and say that they put in just last time around?
Right.
You got to have 8 states or you're not viable. That means it's either you, Cruz, or you, Trump. Or we're going to have some name getting pulled out of a hat.
I think there's going to be a huge effort to rewrite those rules. There are, I believe it's 112 members of the Rules Committee for the National Republican Party. And if you look at, and who hasn't looked at the polling? Everybody's looked at the polling and seen that actually John Kasich, now it's a proxy for the Electoral College, right? Okay, but John Kasich does better at this point than either Senator Cruz or Donald Trump. So I think there would be a frantic effort.
But you imagine the messaging, Andrew, that says, never mind this whole thing we've watched for the last year, the whole primary process. All you folks who counted, who voted, who went through caucuses, who went through the primary processes, never mind. We're going to pick the person we want, even if he has 1/10 of the primary delegates that the front runner did coming into Cleveland.
Well, it's something of a Sophie's choice for the Republican establishment. The question is, which do you think is worse for the party? That perception that they've taken away the votes from Donald Trump, or having Donald Trump as being your standard bearer? In which case, I think a lot of experienced, intelligent Republicans think that's a disaster for the party waiting to happen. So you're really picking your poison, one or the other. One gives you a potential plausible option of winning the White House. The other one, less so. And keep in mind, the people who are writing those rules that we were talking about, they're the establishment. That's Ed Cox, who's the chairman of the New York State Republican Party, friend of the show, is on. He's not saying it publicly, but I don't think anybody thinks he's a big fan of Donald Trump. But he has an enormous say in who gets to go sit on that committee that goes with the rules.
Ed had to make here when I was trying to press him as to how we can end up coming behind Donald Trump. There's a little part of me that was sympathetic. But here's my point, Scott. Here's the part that nobody says. Trump, maybe he'll become even more of a punching bag or a punchline rather when they get to Cleveland. But nonetheless, he will have the greatest number of delegates. Now, Republicans like Ted Cruz, if it's possible, as little as they like Trump and in different ways. The idea that he also will go quietly into the good night when they get to Cleveland, the insurrection that will happen there, because if they're going to go and have a complete food fight and say, we're not going with a leader of the delegates here. And by the way, we're not going with option number 2 either. We'll go to Kasich, we'll try and talk Paul Ryan into it, we'll try and do whatever they're going to do. And I can argue to give them the best chance in the general. The melee that will take place, you've been appointed a delegate before here. Imagine, paint the picture for what we'd see there in Cleveland.
It's not pretty. I mean,
think it's a
you're
Jackson
absolutely
Pollock.
right. It's not. It cannot be pretty. And some are talking about riots and all sorts. And it gets really serious because delegates are banding together for their particular candidate, and then they go after. And you got Samoa and Virgin Islands who are all playing roles there. All of a sudden, they become critical in the delegate count. And then you got the other candidates. What's really interesting about this is because these guys are all going to fight, including Kasich, they may go 3 rounds.
Absolutely.
And if they do go 3 rounds, California's wide open. Now you got 95% of the delegates or something in that neighborhood that are wide open for anybody.
And by the way, can I make a point, Andrew, as a student in history? For everybody to say, hey, we've done this before. We've done this before the age of social media. Do you imagine in real time, and people haven't thought about this, people tweeting here, hey, so-and-so just tried to get me to come over to his side. Everyone's going to be doing back of the envelope math. What does this guy mean? What are they horse trading for this?
Not only that, but money and gifts can be exchanged.
The insider aspect of this, right? The idea that the establishment is picking it. What are the trade-offs?
FEC?
What are the backroom deals to get somebody's delegate vote?
But it's important to remember that, let's say a Trump delegate, a delegate who's representing a Trump constituency in one of the early states, isn't necessarily a guy with Trump on his hat, on one of those old corn cut, or those old hats, or a Trump T-shirt or anything like that. These are people who are picked by different processes, including very political processes. And in New York, it's not picked by the campaigns; it's picked by the party establishment, the state party. And so these are people who might be looking to horse trade. These are people who are not beholden to the candidates in all necessarily that they were elected to represent. So they're bound to vote for the candidate that they were sent there to represent in the first ballot. But in their heart of hearts, they might not really like that candidate, might be perfectly willing to do the horse trading and put the party first.
With 2 people who are on outside the political process for all intents and purposes, Trump and Cruz, if it gets played out that their delegates, not in real terms, but are stolen from them, I'm putting that in parentheses, and how that then plays out from there, and that it's the establishment. I mean, the Republican Party, the grand old party, will have such a reckoning, and then they've got a general, and then they've got all the down ticket races to go. It'll be fascinating. He'll have a front seat to it. You guys going to it?
I'm not planning to.
I may. I may.
That says it all. All right. Speaking of Trump, he unveils his plan for the Mexican border wall. Now, if you think you know this, you don't know the latest version. He's now saying how we get the Mexicans to pay for it. I couldn't make this up if I tried.